I'm going to ask some questions now, and then when the chair returns, she'll, I think, provide Senator Langford the opportunity to speak, and then we'll finally get to Senator Blumenthal. A couple of questions. There's a great deal being written about the degree of leakage, if you will, of things that are not supposed to be exported from our country or from our friends that are somehow getting in the hands of adversaries of one kind or another. How great a problem do you think that is? I mean, how much? How many? I mean, is this a tiny share of those things that are most sensitive, or is this a pretty significant problem that that we need to address? And any one of you can respond to that. Maybe I'll go over to Mr. Mancuso, which is this? And I realize we got a lot of things in the list, and so some things they're not terribly interested in. But I'm thinking particularly about large-scale chips that go into AI or other key defense technologies. How much of that is getting through, do we think? Is this, are we a sieve? Are we, not really a sieve, but drip, drip, drip? What's kind of the characterization of what's getting around our export controls?
Thank you for that question. I can say this, as the Assistant Director for Global Trade, I think the sheer volume of legitimate trade far outweighs the illicit trade that's going on. However, that small slice is of concern. So what you have is you have folks at this table, all the 20 partners at the E2C2, the intelligence community, all of us are completely laser focused on retaining America's innovation, our creativity, our intellectual property right. We develop the most advanced weapon systems in the world. Because of our ability to create this, we are the envy of the entire world. That also means our adversaries will stop at nothing to obtain this technology in these weapon systems. So with that being said, we are focused on this issue. We are an investigative agency looking at these agencies, attempting to disrupt and dismantle the flow of this technology. And it concerns all of us. Like I said, we're focused. I'm also concerned the day that they don't want our technology, the day that we aren't the world leader, because that means that they've surpassed us and they've become superior. And all of us at this table are laser focused, making sure that day never happens.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition that with regards to AI in particular, it's very difficult to control the software. Some software on AI has already been put on open source and represents, in my view, a huge breach of poor judgment. Or breach of good judgment, and it is poor judgment. And there are some who believe that the only way we're going to try and keep AI from being used in a most negative way is if we limit the supply of the chips necessary to operate AI. Are we able to do that successfully, or is it like, no, we really can't? Mr. Curlin, do you have a sense of that?
So at BIS, Senator, we have been imposing controls not only on entities that are involved in these types of diversionary attempts, but we have over the past year and a half rolled out a series of significant countrywide controls on China, in addition to parties not only that are resident there, but there are actors that are sitting in third countries as well. It is a complex problem set, and certainly with regards to the semiconductor ecosystem, where the vast majority of chips that are produced offshore, trying to identify potential violators is something that we all here are working hard to do, using all source intelligence, putting together analytical cells that are trying to identify those activities, working hand in hand with industry to both prevent on the front side, and then if there are violations, to have penalties that are high enough to deter others is critical. We've been doing that as an interagency. We've issued over a dozen multi-sealed documents just in the past year and a half that's trying to get at this problem set, is how do we get industry to harden their supply chains and their distribution networks? And then we're working globally, internationally. Chair Hassan mentioned some of the complications of our international partners. In most of these jurisdictions, the licensing folks are actually disconnected from the enforcement folks, right? And that creates a bit of a gap because the enforcement folks don't know what's coming into the system that's being licensed, and the licensing folks don't actually know what's going out, which is the biggest vulnerability, the things that should be coming into the system that aren't. And so we've been working very closely. We have attachés similar to HSI that are stationed now in 10 countries around the globe, trying to get our international partners to increase their capacity to identify and then take enforcement action in coordination with us. It's a challenge, but we're using all the tools at our disposal, industry, interagency, international, to try to get at making sure that these key technologies aren't getting into those hands. And where we identify it, we're either using criminal enforcement, administrative enforcement, or as I mentioned just this morning, we added 4 companies to our entity list in China that were explicitly diverting AI chips to the Chinese military weapons program so that we can alert industry and have them harden their supply chains when they're doing their due diligence of transactions.
And what will the penalties be for those corporations that have been, if you will, shipping those chips into China?
Sure. So they would be subject to criminal and/or administrative enforcement authority. So 20 years, up to 20 years in jail, or $1 million per fine. And then on the administrative side, we have a statutory maximum of $365,000, or twice the value of each violation. And as in the case of Seagate, that resulted in a $300 million penalty to set a deterrence level to say, we expect companies to put in place internal compliance programs where they're screening their transactions, and then when they find a problem, to come to us voluntarily through what we call a voluntary self-disclosure to tell us. Because if they don't do it, and there's a willful action or there's knowledge, then we're going to take aggressive action to try to deter others from shortchanging, and also putting those that are investing in compliance programs at a competitive disadvantage. So we want to level that playing field at the same time.
Ms. Choi, who's been the most successful in being able to get the key technologies that are vital and we have endeavored to restrict? Is it China or is it Russia? We read stories about Russia being able to get technologies that they're using in Ukraine. At the same time, we read about China. Just today, we've read more stories about China getting advantage of our technologies. Are they equally effective, or is one more effective than the other?
Senator Romney, I would say that I would refer you to the IC's annual threat assessment, which focuses on China's efforts in particular. I would say both of those countries pose concerns, but with regard to China, that threat assessment notes that China seeks to become a world science and technology superpower and to use this technological superiority for economic, political, and military gain. And among its various methods to do that, it includes means to acquire or steal IP, its cyber operations, and its illicit procurement. So I would say China is laser focused on trying to advance its science and technology program, and it's a focus for us at the Department of Justice.
Thank you. I'm going to ask an open-ended question, which is what you would recommend that we do, if anything, to reduce the flow of technology from the U.S., particularly that which has been limited by export controls, that nonetheless is finding its hands in Russia, China, and other places, in part because it's so critical now with AI. It's always been important, but now with AI, it's the national security implications of us not being able to manage the super semiconductors that go or that are necessary for AI is really extraordinary. And I wonder whether, I'm going to offer suggestions. One is more coordination among different agencies in the U.S., whether we need to do a better job and establish some type of entity that does more coordination. Another alternative, which is putting more burden on the shoulders of companies. So chip manufacturers, Intel, AMD, TI, and so forth, analog devices. Given the fact that we just heard from Senator Blumenthal that there was a 1,000% increase in shipments to a neighbor of Russia of technology, which is ultimately clearly going to Russia. There could be a requirement that on particularly highly sensitive items, not all the items that we put export controls on, but on certain highly sensitive items, that a corporation must track where it's gone and where it is, and be able to provide that information to somebody to say, all right, yeah, this is where it is. And if they don't do that, that we fine them heavily or provide other sanctions. I hate just finding more requirements for you guys and trying to say, well, we got to get more money to you, because we all know that dollars are hard to come by at the federal government level. So how about, say, to, corporations, if you're going to see ship something of high sensitivity to some nation that's not part of the coalition, then you have to track where it is and be able to report to us how much you've sent to which company and where those items have gone. And that means putting people in that country, tracking it, determining through an audit whether it's done. I mean, I'm looking for what are the solutions to this, because it ain't working now. There's a great effort on our part, but they're finding ways around it. So why don't we just go down in the order that you each testified with any suggestions you have as, very briefly, if you were king for a day, what should we be doing differently than we're doing, legislatively or else, or in other ways?
Senator Romney, with regard to your specific thought regarding the burden or the changing standards as it applies to corporations, I'll defer to Mr. Curlin on that. I know you said that you understand that resources are scarce. If I could just illustrate one example of the resources that are required to do these sophisticated cases. In one sanctions case alone I'm thinking of, there are multiple petabytes of data which we had to analyze for one criminal case. We simply are at our wits' end when it comes to resourcing and doing the big data analytics that we know our adversaries are doing with our data. We need to be able to do that and be armed to do that. And so I would have that in mind when you're thinking about resourcing in the FY25. One other thing that's maybe not so obvious but is very important to us is the reauthorization of Section 702. It's absolutely vital to all of the national security work that we do, but in particular, I think it's important to highlight that in certain instances, we've been able to glean insights into the illicit transfer of technology and goods to hostile foreign state actors through the use of that particular tool. We'd be happy to give you more details in a classified setting, but that is incredibly vital to every single thing that we do day in, day out.
Thank you.
So, Senator, I can't respond to policy prescriptions. I'm on the enforcement side. What I can commit to you is that if new actions are taken, we will commit to aggressively enforce those. From our perspective, that requires, more analysts, more attachés overseas, more agents that are working with DOJ to bring criminal cases, and it gets back to that IT issue as well. Better IT systems so that we can create efficiencies to identify these violators and then more quickly be able to bring those cases, whether it's a criminal case, whether it's an administrative case, whether it's an entity listing. We have the authorities. We've never worked better together as an interagency in terms of E2C2, Disruptive Technology Strike Force. They are working in a complementary manner and sharing those resources. But the more resources that we have, the more effective we can be.
Thank you.
Well, the important first step was today. We're having a hearing highlighting the importance of this. And number two, HSI is we're not a policy agency. We're not a regulatory agency. We're an investigative agency. So as I've mentioned earlier, just ensuring that we have the resources to do what we do. And we are, like I said, we have a very healthy global footprint, and we're working every day. The men and women of HSI are working with our international partners. And to continue that, I believe that, again, is a recipe for success. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair.